My name's Tom Visconti, and I was a field service technician at the time, working for Westinghouse. It was at a hospital local to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where the incident occurred. It was an arc flash incident, and it's long before they had arc flash safety procedures in place. If a certain device that's energized with electricity touches ground or goes phase to phase, and the end result is either an explosion or an extreme fire which becomes hotter than the sun. And that's what happened to me. The project I was assigned to do was to install these circuit breaker cell shorting switches for an PCB type circuit breaker, which was a molded case circuit breaker, which were not installed by the contractor on this brand new Westinghouse equipment. The customer preferred to use an independent service group to do the commissioning of the new equipment rather than the manufacturer. They weren't really familiar with the gear, and upon testing the equipment for commissioning, they realized that there were no cell shorting switches in the main breakers. Today's procedure is much different. You would not work on energized equipment of 480 volts or even 208 volts. An independent testing company did do the certification, the startup, commissioning of the circuit breaker. And in doing so, they weren't familiar with the equipment as we were, because it was our equipment. End result was they over-torqued the circuit breaker, causing the top line side finger cluster to be compressed further than it should have, and it was open and close to either ground or a bus bar coming down, or just a live ground wire. And in doing so, when the electrician leaned against the breaker after I had installed the switch, the finger cluster opened up enough. He put his weight against it. I said, "I'm backing out now." And in doing so, he leaned against the breaker, causing the finger cluster to open and hit ground. In doing so, there was a bolted fault. The whole line side part of the breaker, especially the top right-hand side C phase, melted significantly, and the carbon flash occurred across the top of the breaker. It melted a breaker that was approximately this high down to something about this high in a matter of seconds. My skin on the tops of my hands experienced a 3rd-degree burns, the worst part of it, and the skin literally melted back, and it was black, my hands. The top part of my arms primarily were burnt. The hair was all burned off my arms, but that was probably 1st and 2nd-degree burns up here. My eyes, the only thing I could say about my eyes is my vision. I had an eye examination a month before this incident occurred, and probably within a week or two after, I started having vision issues. And the eye doctors who examined my eyes were amazed how many dark spots there were, which indicated there was cornea damage at some point. They didn't know how severe it was. I can only tell you they took 100 pictures of my eyes, and they wanted to also see if it was hereditary. My father came in and he had his eyes examined by the same doctor. And in this particular case, this was a main breaker. So it is fed from a transformer. Ahead of the transformer is a medium voltage switch. I think it was a 5,000 volt rated switch that fed the transformer. It had protective fuses on the load side of that switch. So the fault had to get through the transformer and blow the fuses on that fuse disconnect switch which took a lot of energy before it can clear that fault. And that's why there was so much of flame and flash that came out. There are so many things you need to know about arc flash. You really need to be trained with the proper PPE clothing, face shields, in some cases ventilated, depending on where you're working and what the temperature is. You have to have the proper levels of arc flash clothing. And typically, if you work for an electrical company, before you go out to work on that equipment, you have to have the training nowadays. Know your safety procedures, know your arc flash procedures, know your safe distance. You want to try to shut the equipment down whenever possible. There's so many rules you need to know, and my whole purpose of doing this video is to make sure nobody else gets hurt or injured or killed.